Today's episode is brought to you by Simply Faster. Simply Faster is an online athletic performance technology shop distributing items such as the Freelap timing system, GymAware, K-Box, 1080 Sprint, and the Speed Mat. I've gotten many of these items from Simply Faster and can confidently say that they make today's best training technology available to everybody. The Freelap timing system has revolutionized both my practices and my athlete assessments, allowing me to look at the 10-meter fly capability of dozens of athletes in a matter of seconds. It is wireless, compact, portable, and incredibly versatile. The K-Box and 1080 Sprint are fantastic tools for any coach looking to build speed, agility, and implement training scenarios that go beyond the traditional weight room. The 1080 Sprint is being used by great coaches training some of the fastest sprinters in the world, and it truly represents high-performance speed training. I can personally attest that Simply Faster's customer service is second to none. Christopher at Simply Faster responds quickly to queries, and anyone who makes a purchase from Simply Faster is in good hands. If you want to acquire some of the best high-tech training equipment available, stop by simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. They are the future of coaching technology.
Welcome to episode 137 of the Just Fly Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Smith. Thanks for being here today. And this is a solo show where I'm going to speak on a topic, I guess you would call it, improving the workout experience. And so one of the things that I think I've really learned as a coach over the years is I used to be very, I guess I really don't know how much I could possibly put more emphasis on it, into the ideas behind periodization and sets and reps and exercises, and how that all mixed together in kind of this symphony or orchestra to give an athlete their best result over time. The more I've gone along in the coaching profession, the more I've realized that that is extremely important. But the nuances of how you do your workouts, how you administer them, the art of coaching, obviously creating buy-in and all that is important. But how do you speak to athletes? How do you create the imagery to them, or the sensation to them, that allows them to execute the exercise how it's supposed to be done? How do you let that, I guess you would call it like the inner animal that's inside of an athlete, that inner being of an athlete that can move perfectly and effectively, that's subconscious driven? How do you let that come out? And how do you give an athlete the best experience in light of their, I guess, their greatest strengths as an athlete? Because I think that we all, and this is probably be, I want to open with this, is that if you think of an athlete as someone who is broken, they have weak muscles you need to strengthen, they need to be taught how to sprint and jump and do all these things that come innately, I think that road leads to its own set of characteristics. My take on it, after being in this industry for not as long as many, but for a little bit, has been that we as athletes have the tools, the innate tools, to instinctually execute running and jumping with fantastic technique, to a point where it's optimal for our own bodies in many cases. And we're overcoached more often than we're undercoached. And the way that the brain experiences training, so and that goes to say that has a huge impact in how you allow athletes to experience the training process. When you feed the athlete who has these great capabilities the right set, not only the right sets and reps and exercises, but also the way that those exercises are designed and distributed, you'll see some really fantastic results. And maybe I'll kick this off with a nice little example. Before, I think that there's that 2, 3, 4 minute point in any podcast where people decide if they're going to listen to it or not. Shoot, maybe it's 5-10 seconds. I don't know. Hopefully you're still with me, but I'll put it this way: is and I've seen this play out with athletes many times as well. But from a practical example, from a track and field perspective, because track is just you and the distance or the time or how high is the bar. And my junior year in high jump, my progression through high school and high jump, I jumped 6'8". My senior year of high school, I regressed, and I jumped I jumped a half inch less my freshman year of college. I jumped 6'8 3/4 my sophomore year, and then my junior year I just exploded, and I jumped 7 foot and a quarter inch, and I improved a ton in all my other marks too. It was just a year where everything really came together, and I could really I was definitely the most athletic I had ever been, and it just was an amazing year full of great lessons. The next year, my senior year, I only jumped 6'10". I didn't triple jump as far. Nothing was quite as good. And one of the biggest differences between that junior and senior year specifically, because by my senior year, the training had been figured out to some degree. There were still a lot of mistakes made, but one of the biggest mistakes made was in the way that the high jump workouts were administered, which I was the type of athlete that just said, I'm going to go high jump by myself. This had nothing to do with my coach. But I found my junior year that the crossbar, if you high jump crossbars, there's like little screws on the side, and you can basically the bar, just because it says 6 foot on the side of the standard where the readout is, that doesn't mean it's 6 foot. It may be 5'10", it may be 6'2", depending on how these little adjusters on the standards are set. There's a few different like alterations for the thing. And so long story short is when I thought the bar was like 6'2", it was really 6'1", maybe even a teeny bit less. And so I go through that whole fall thinking that I'm jumping just a little bit higher than I actually am. And what that did, though, when I was doing these practices, is it just created this this sense where I was like, wow, I'm doing really good. Like, I'm jumping better than I was at this point last year. and that confidence just kept getting me this hit of dopamine and positive momentum. And that was a really important, I feel, contribution to how well I ended up doing. It's just my mental state was always so positive because I thought I was doing better than I actually was. And I think if I would have gone back and, it would have been the actual bar height, maybe I would have strained a little bit more. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten the result that I did. And that actually just happened to be my senior year. So the next year, and this happens, I see this in swimming a lot too, in working with swimmers now, always looking at, well, I was here at this point last year. And what happens when you let that get in your head? It's not a good thing. And to continually we always are competing against ourselves, but when that causes us to strain and kind of disobey these laws of training, I guess you can call, I don't feel like I'm in a position to create a law of training. I'm not. I just feels good to say that. But all the things I'm going to talk about, that's just my experience, just throwing it out there through this episode, what I consider good training practice. As soon as you get into this mode where you're literally fighting your result from last year to stay on top, you really start to break, I guess, a lot of those laws. And so, my senior year, long story short, spent a lot of the year being like, okay, I'm going to be more specific in my training efforts, more nervous system driven, less tempo running, less general work. And the specific work that I did, I found that the high jump bars were off. So I fixed it. So now 6'2" was 6'2", 6'4" was 6'4", 6 foot was 6 foot. And every practice, I would always think, oh, well, I was here last year. I need to be jumping higher than this on this particular approach. And I would take jump after jump after jump, same pathway, just straining. And I got to a point where I just completely hit the wall that November. We had started training in September. It was a point where I couldn't even make, I jumped 7 feet the year before, and I couldn't even jump 6 foot one practice off like a 5-step or maybe a rolling in 5-step approach. And I was just like completely beside myself with how I just felt like I was out of shape and I had no pop and I wasn't that strong. And it was, that was really a big point. It wasn't just the straining, but that was a big part of it, was the grind. That part where you're just trying so hard to do something and then you flush everything else out of the training process. So that everything else is I keep saying we, but maybe I say we because collectively, I've learned from so many guests and so many great coaches and so many authors, and so it's almost like I don't want to like claim all these ideas as my own because they're not. This is just my, like, me as a conduit kind of explaining my experience. But today's episode is about good training. It's about the mental framework that makes an athlete accept training better. You've heard Tony Holler talk about dopamine and PRs and not getting beat a couple episodes ago, which was awesome stuff. We're going to talk about the brain's experience of things, how to frame and how to really kind of like section off workouts and exercises and give them to an athlete in a manner that doesn't get them in their own head, where they're not just going to grind and try hard. And hard work, there's this thing, like, you call it like a try hard, right? Like this person's who's a try hard athlete. And there's a difference between having a really strong work ethic and trying too hard. I believe everyone should have a really strong work ethic. Every athlete, coach, a strong work ethic is to be desired. But the best athletes in the world when they are doing their sport or skill, they make it look easy. And it's not like they just show up to competition and it looks easy. They practice it like that. And so I think a lot about how do you create a training system that allows for better movement, and that better movement leads to continual progress. Because really, when we strain to do something, like I strained to beat where I was last year in high jump on a given day, that straining tends to lead to a lot of bad technique and compensations and excessive forebrain or thinking brain activity in a movement that should be subconscious and joyful, really. Like to me, that one of the core tenets of athleticism is the joy you get from setting a PR and just seeing what your body can do and enjoying movement. And so the first thing I want to talk about is I was reading, is I would call it the experiential mode versus the default mode brain network. A lot of these things I'm going to talk about. Actually, I'm writing an article series on Just Fly Sports now. If you go to justflysports.com, which it's funny because I feel like this podcast has actually gotten to the point where some people don't really even go to the website. There is a website, justflysports.com. I do have a blog there. And so I've been writing a few series of all the things that kind of pop into my head during the course of my workouts, like these moments of intuition, and then expanding on them a little bit. And one of the points was the default brain network versus the experiential brain network. And I got this from Dr. Mike Russell. I caught an article of his. I don't read T Nation, but I was browsing through it just because I'm kind of curious what's popular there and how they sort their articles. And I came across this article by Dr. Mike Russell talking about the default versus experiential brain network. I ended up buying the book about that on Blinkist, just the summary. And in short, you need to train in your experiential brain network. You do not want to train in your default brain network. So what is the difference between those two? Default mode, just imagine that you're kind of like, I guess you could say like you're driving down the road. You're not really paying attention to, everything's on autopilot basically. You just kind of go into this routine. In a training perspective, it would just be you're just going to go run laps, and every time you're going to try to hit 75 seconds every time you run around, and not really thinking about much outside of the clock. And that's just how you're going to go along. It would be the same thing, honestly, as going out and trying to high jump an inch higher than you did last time. I'm going to high jump 6'4" today. I did 6'3" last week. I have to do 6'4". It is a number-oriented goal. And a good example of this as well is like if you watch swimmers, like I've been around swimmers a little bit, and if you watch like particular groups of swimmers, like people who are really like over distance type grouping, and swimming is notorious for just insane yardages. You'll see people who are just surviving. They're just kind of slogging around. Each turn is kind of blah. Like there's not really a huge intent to it. They're just doing the work. It's like, here's the workout, just do it. Experiential would be if there is, I guess it's maybe something that's more pertinent, but in track and field, it would be the difference between running 8 200s and 8 200s over hurdles, or take that 1600 meters you sprinted and look at the 1600 meters of sprinting you might get when playing a game of football, and how much experience, how much reaction do you have to make in that game of football? How many minute how much is going on and how much is exciting your neural network versus just running? And it's no wonder that like high jumpers will roll off the basketball court and jump their PR, and then they actually train and they just high jump, and they stop playing basketball, and training switches from experiential to default mode. It switches to just A plus B equals C, do this run up, jump over the bar, just go as high as you can, this practice the end. And whereas a game of basketball, there's a ton of different decisions and variabilities, and it's immersive, and you're immersed in the experience of playing. And so I think a lot about, and I've always been like this. I've always realized, because it was not long after I quit, when I stopped high school, went to college, I stopped playing basketball and started track, and I found very quickly, like, I didn't play basketball much. I was just training with the track team. And what I found was that I couldn't dunk anymore the first time I tried to play basketball. And it was almost like I needed to play basketball a few games to be able to dunk again. And that dunking reciprocally helped my high jumping. And so it was those own experiences of my own that I really started to take into my athletics. and my athletic coaching. And when I would find athletes and they were struggling and just like, I remember I would have high jumpers who were basketball players, and if they were kind of feeling like their nervous system was fried, I'd just say, well, just go shoot around and do some layups and run up and down the court for a half hour, 45 minutes. And that very often did the trick. And it's like, these are unconventional things, right? And so igniting that experience where you have these challenges, these sensory challenges. Same thing too as like doing dunk training, basketball dunk training, where you're doing 360s or trying to do between the legs, and there's a lot more elements of skill present than just jump as high as you can. When something becomes just do this as hard as you can, just do this as far as you can, just do this as fast as you can, as high as you can, and that's the only thing, and it's a 1 and 0 binary equation, and the only thing to put in is effort, you're going to get burnt out pretty quickly. Your nervous system just doesn't accept that very well. And maybe it's because you start to bring in more compensations. That could certainly be one thing. You're bringing in compensations. It could be labeled as unhealthy from a survival standpoint. You're at higher risk of hurting yourself. Or maybe it's the repetitive pattern over and over again from one specific joint, load on your joints. It could be that. But every time we do that, it's difficult. It can be difficult to continue to gain in that scenario. And now I think there are training situations where even look at previous guest Tony Holler and Feed the Cats. They do a fairly repetitive sprint and a very fast, explosive sprint training system. And I think sprint training, I think jump training is a little bit more affected by this than sprinting, just in my experience. And then he has the X Factor day with a variety plyometrics, a variety jump day. And I think it is that thing, right? The jump day should be a higher variety, because if you do the same jumping over and over and over again, that really has these high impact forces. And then Tony also has that dopamine enhancing rank, record, and publish, and the team environment that he creates. And I think that also has a really powerful effect in staving off the nervous system getting stagnant from doing a similar program over and over again. I really do think that jumping probably has a little bit more in this than the sprinting world, but even sprinting for me, I was faster when I played basketball and have that elastic strength gain from basketball. That's important for me, and it's similar to the X Factor. But either way you look at it, that variety and the explosive skill strength is the spice of life. And I do want to know, I don't believe all training should be like 100% crazy variety and all different tools and toys. There needs to be meat and potatoes sets and reps that are done. I just think that paying attention to the mindset and environment and buy-in by which those sets and reps are performed is really important. And then knowing when to selectively utilize much more exploratory type work versus the typical meat and potatoes type work. I think it's all important. I just think how we frame it and how we look at it is a very important factor. And so a few other scenarios where you can really see that. One is the Ruzon long jump study that I highlight a lot in my writing, where, and I've probably talked about it even in this podcast and a Q&A, but where there was two groups of long jumpers, and one group, they just jumped as far as they could every single time, and another group had kind of like a golf game, if you will, like where they had different distances they had to jump and different targets they had to jump each time, rather than just going all out. And at the end of the day, the group that did the different jumps, which is more experiential by nature, they ended up jumping farther, because I think the brain just gets sick of just try as hard as you can every time. Same thing, Kier Wenham Flat was telling me of a coach who did the stress inoculation with like a flying 10, and they would have like a flying 10 golf where you weren't trying to go as fast as you could. You would just try to hit particular times instead of all out, which is really the same principle as the long jump study. And I think it has inroads to possibilities for sprinting and just maximal sprint ability as well, especially in probably a track and field situation where it is very largely just go as fast as you can quite often. I do think there's ramifications there. And I need to get back in touch with that coach as well. A brilliant mind, whoever came up with that idea with the stress inoculation and the timing gate golf. Another thing too, and you hear this, is and this is a crazy one, right? But it's people who claim to be able to, that low rim dunking, if people are dunkers and they're trying to dunk as well as they can on a 10-foot hoop, that low rim dunking improves their max vertical jump, which seems crazy because it's a low rim. It's not as high as a 10-foot rim. Well, now what's the difference here is the 10-foot rim is probably more experiential because there's more possibilities of tricks you can do. You can do tricks you couldn't before on a higher rim. you're not thinking about just jumping as high as you can. You're more drawn to the experience of what trick are you going to do, and now you can land dunks that you couldn't before. You're getting a dopamine rush. The effect of the brain on the low rim dunk is really beneficial on the high rim, and it's also almost like a same but different too. And maybe the same but different being like I get what I got from Easy Strength, Dan, John, and Pavel, and this brilliant idea of like Tommy Kono being a Olympic lifter, but then doing bodybuilding in the off season just for fun for a few months before he gets back into Olympic lifting, still working strength but in a totally different context, and then he'll go back to being an Olympic lifter. Or you could look at a basketball player playing volleyball, or a track athlete playing basketball or football. You're the same thing, but it's experienced by the athlete's brain in a different manner. And obviously the movement variety that comes with that is just massive. The one thing that I like personally is doing, if I do tempo, and I talked about this in the Tony Holler podcast, 5x200, I don't mind that stuff. When I was my best at high jump, I was doing a lot of like 6, 7, 8x200s and 3, 4, 5x300s, and I'd run my best 300 actually. That year I jumped 7 feet, but those tempo days I never strained at all. I just was like, I'm just going to be as relaxed as I can and do the work and not worry about being fast. Stuff I had done the couple of years before, I would strain on the tempo the years before, and it didn't help me out. And I realized that tempo is more or less for jumpers. It's just a couple benefits. Elasticity. It has like electrical resistance benefits, I believe. If you read Starzinski's work, for people who maybe are a little bigger, heavier, have more muscle mass. Not that I have a ton of muscle mass, but I think if you approach it with the right manner, the non-grinding manner, it has benefits. But throw hurdles in there, and it's a totally different activity. It just went from default to experiential, and because now and then you got to jump over a hurdle, and so there's always a way to engage your brain. And you look at the way some athletes are, like a type 1B like myself, or a 2A might love that. A type 3 would probably hate it. So you have to look at what lights an athlete's brain up. I think it's just different for everybody. And so and finally, the whole like experience thing, I think, and you heard Jeremy Frisch say this a few podcasts ago, and I think this is just solid gold, is like when you can trick athletes, quote unquote, into doing exercise. And he was talking about a game with young athletes where they'd have to like run and then do a squat like under a hurdle. I don't remember the exact game, but it was something where the athlete wouldn't really actively realize how many squats they were actually doing. It's the fun and the gamification of it, if you will. That is a word. I think that the app world is definitely seeing that. But the gamification of training allows people to experience more reps and sets than they would if they were actually thinking, okay, now I've done 8 squats, now I've done 9 squats. And I've always said this too, is that the plyometric load experience through, say, a game of basketball or volleyball is far, far, far different than the plyometric load through a series of depth jumps or hurdle hops or whatever. And the experiential effect of that is huge. And part of it too, and I'm realizing this more the more I work with the Darian Barr, is that a lot of those jumps in volleyball and basketball follow the waveform that is more conducive to healthy joints and the way the body naturally transfers energy, which is big little type movements. Like you would take a big second to last step into a running 2-leg jump, then your feet would come close together for the last step, that's the little, and then you would jump up in a big manner, that's the big. And versus like if you're doing like a bunch of depth jumps or hurdle hops, it's usually just like big and those waveforms are a lot more taxing on the body than the big little waveforms. So not only in basketball and volleyball and football or whatever sport you're playing, you have like these more naturally occurring big little waveforms, but you also have it in a different experience. So my goal has always been, well, how can we take that entity, how can we take that thing and make our plyometrics more like that? I think there's a lot of ways to do it. I think it's limited really only by our creativity in many ways. But it's in my workouts now, I have something I almost call it like fun plyometric day, where I have to literally invent like a new way of doing a plyometric. Or like one I always liked was and this was a good waveform plyometric. If you work with track athletes, it's a cool one where you do the two, like line up like 2 little 30-inch hurdles, and you jump over the 2 30-inch hurdles quickly, and then you have a high jump bar next to it, and that's like the big. So you basically go little big. And so the two hops are low. They're not high. They're just like low, quick hops, and then you go into a big jump over the high jump bar. My best when I jumped 7 feet was I think 4 feet 8 inches, whatever that kind of comes out to, and that was way up from the year before. And I don't know how much better my regular old depth jumps necessarily were, but I feel like the better we get at that waveform stuff that matches the little big and whatever is in your plyometric arsenal that matches that, the better we get at that stuff, I think the better we can get at actual sport movement that tends to follow that. So that's a big idea. That's my first bit in this whole experiential world.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster.
The next, and I wrote about this in my my articles. I call them the thought melee, because it's like it's almost like this flurry of thoughts that's always coming to me. I really couldn't come up with an amazing name for this series, but go ahead and check it out on the website. But it's how the easy strength principles, and this is in the same vein. How does easy strength fit into speed and power training? And easy strength is just that. Dan John and Powell wrote the book. Amazing book. It's a must read. It's cheap on Kindle. Like it's almost a crime if you're a sports performance or a coach or a professional to not have read it in some ways. But it talks about the big thing that I've taken from that book is minimal effective dose, higher frequency of work, which again is a little bit suited towards the 1A, 1B, maybe 2A end of the spectrum if you're looking at neurotyping. But it works for anybody. And then minimum effective dose, and then but it's the attitude and the mentality and the execution of each set that is really the difference maker. So take an athlete who's about to do a set of back squats, and they have their 5 rep max on the bar. And there's 2 ways of experiencing that load. One way is relaxed, cool, calm, not getting emotionally amped up. Just walk under the bar and do 2 or 3 reps without straining the third one. If you do a third one, put the bar back, no worries. The second way of doing it, get emotionally amped up, slap the chalk, maybe have someone slap your back, stomp around a little bit, get amped up, get the bar, do 4 reps, grind out a 5th rep, think about doing the 6th rep, but then put it back, and you're done. And now, it doesn't seem like, it's not a huge change, right? 2 reps difference, maybe 3 between the two. But the way that the body processes the stress of the second way you did it is actually immense, to the point where that stressful load is going to dig into the next day's workout. When you're caught in the moment, you don't feel it, and it really just plays into the subtleties that is training, that is working out. Adarian Barr has said something a few weeks ago to me that I will always carry with me, and that's ripples become waves. And he was talking about it in the sense of the little nuances of joint movement and joint position in running and jumping will make a big difference, as like, for example, as you go along in a sprint, the way that you set up your arches and your feet to get out of your acceleration will make a big difference, and you'll start to see it manifest itself the further you go along. It becomes a wave, and now we notice it. So that's huge to me. But that ripples to waves goes beyond even just we see how the subtleties of movement, and the best coaches are those who can see the subtleties, and that's where that coach's eye comes in. But it also manifests itself in the subtlety of the mental state, the subtlety of an athlete who knows that they want to train just enough to preserve the next day, and that they can make they want to make the next day good, and they don't want to eat into the next day, and they know that subtle little difference through the awareness of what they need to do to make that happen. I was also talking a little bit too about just awareness in general in a workout on the level of the individual. I do think there's a lot riding on the coach on when to cut a set, when to say we're not jumping anymore today, to say no, I don't want you doing that 5th sprint. There is a lot riding on the coach, but I also think there's a little bit in the level of the athlete and the awareness of the athlete. And whether you're a coach or an athlete listening to this, if you're a coach, obviously how do we help our athletes have a really good awareness of their own system and how they're going to respond, and when is that tipping point in the sets or the reps or the jumps or the workouts where it's time to just shut it down and go home and rest up and I think that awareness is improved the more we can really be truly present in a workout. I wrote about this on my first week thought melee installation 1, but this idea of And you hear Arnold Schwarzenegger talk about this. All these guys on their phones working out. Every time I do go to a public gym to work out, I used to go to a rock climbing gym. Now I don't go to. Sometimes when I'm like visiting the in-laws, I'll go to like a big healthplex, and it is just crazy to see people. They'll do a set of arm curls or whatever, or squats and bench, and then they sit there on their phone and they, I don't know, whatever they're doing, and then they go do the next set, and then they sit there on the phone, and then they go to the next thing. But it's like, to me, I'm like, what? Well, one, I mean, how much does that just put your workout in default mode? Do sets and reps, then get the dopamine hit off your phone, not off your workout. It's like, and I really do like to think of a workout as a meditation, just being fully immersed in what you're doing. But I this kind of came to me during a workout, was like, as an athlete, as having the ownership of the workout from the athlete end, to be fully immersed in the workout where that point, that switch where you need to stop the workout, where you need to end the sprints, and where you need to perhaps not do another set. To know that point intuitively on an intuitive level does take a level of awareness, and I think it's a level of awareness that can be taught and worked on to be immersed in that workout. And so I have a few ideas for how to be immersed in the workout on that blog post. One of the things I do like is I like Paul Chek's working in idea. I'm a big fan of Paul Chek, and I think that he has some really good stuff with that, so if you just do working in, or just breathing, or just one of my favorites is like Elliot Hulse's like bioenergetic stool breathing. I like to set up a rear foot elevated split squat and just do good deep breathing between my sets. Because one, I just need to do it anyways, but it just keeps you in a really good state throughout the workout, and I think it also helps the thoughts that come to me during the workout. So that being said, I'm getting away from the easy strength thing a little bit, but it's also that mentality of knowing when to end the set, and the elite powerlifters, Dan, John, and Pavel talk about the elite seasoned powerlifters are the ones who know to do a 3 when they could have 5 that weight. They're smart, and they don't want to ruin tomorrow by what they do today. And so I think about this in the sense of speed training too, and having that like intuitive feel on how to, but how do you make a sprint set easier is I guess what I'm getting at, right? Because sprinting is all out, sprinting is max. To me, it's more so just, again, like I talked about before, it's getting away from the try as hard as you can, this sprint element, and more so, how will I find a new way to experience this sprint mindset? How do I find a new way to experience this flying 10, to experience this 30 meters? Because I mean, if you've watched anyone do a flying 10, you know that the easiest way to not run fast is just to try harder. That never works. Like Charlie Francis talked about that. He talked about athletes will run faster when it's a 9 out of 10 effort than a 10 out of 10 effort. And just that being a starting point is a great place. Just give me a 9 out of 10 effort. Give me a 90% effort. If you want to turn it up, maybe give me a 91% effort. But what I found is I really like doing, and I think that there's a lot of cool like training means and modalities that are out there now that make you able to experience a sprint in different ways. Like I wear a Darien Bars insoles a lot, modified footwear that allows you to experience a sprint in a different way from the ground up, which is really cool. I think that what Exogen is doing with the Exogen suit, these little teeny fusiform weights create these little subtle sensations that you can feel differently. Even something as simple as running like with one arm and seeing how that arm works different, and just paying attention to how it works. That's like the inner game of tennis. You don't try so hard, you just pay attention to things. And then you can perhaps exaggerate those things if you feel like it's beneficial. Just playing around with like David Weck's pulsars and how to different manipulations asymmetrically, one arm the other, one weight in a different a light weight in one hand, a heavy weight in the other. Just playing around with different sensations allows a fuller, richer experience. That is, you're kind of not emotionally getting fired up and just banging your head against the wall to go faster, but you're creating a sensory environment that again allows you to remain in that experiential network, and you're not blowing your circuits, and you're not just kind of pounding at the ceiling, just hoping to break through, but you're really just creating this robust, full use of your athletic abilities. So that was something that I thought about, and I think is an important idea. So the next thing I wanted to talk about in improving like the workout experience, the way that athletes experience things, is I know there's a lot of strength coaches out there, and I've given a lot of track references. And so if you're still with me, I want to talk a little bit about the weight room, and something that I think is a really interesting piece and highly debated is the Olympic lifts. A lot of coaches do them. A lot of coaches don't do them. I do believe that they are easy to teach, but I also believe that a lot of athletes, if you do the Olympic lifts and you were not taught them correctly, and basically you're lifting the weight from the floor to your shoulders in kind of one big smooth pull, I don't think that's very conducive to good athleticism. I think you could, if you lifted like that, you're just putting excess noise in the system. You may be being explosive in some sense, but it's not a sense of, if you looked at the waveform of that clean, it's not a waveform that transfers to athleticism. If we look at exercise and movement in terms of waves and vibrations and energy, like Nikola Tesla talks about, I like to look at cleans as like Olympic lifts as a waveform, just like anything else, and they should be taught as a waveform, which means you have to hit a second pull. Now, if the second pull being when the bar passes the knees subtly rebend. I'm going to spit out the NSCA's guidelines here, right? Like the knees subtly rebend, the hamstring stretch load, then the energy is unloaded as the knees move forward and the bar brushes the thighs or connects with the thighs. And then that connection turns into this upward impulse, this quick extension of the hip, knees, and ankles. And the reversal of that is the catch. And so you almost could look at that waveform as a big. The big is the movement that gets the bar from the floor to the knees. The little is the really quick hit. That quick pop of the knees shooting forward is the little, and then the big is dropping under to catch. And so just kind of reframing your mind around that, I think, is cool. And just also, like, I would challenge, and I'm challenging myself more of this too, is watching the subtleties, just to be able to watch an athlete do Olympic lifts and be like, and see what kind of athlete they are just by how fast can they twitch into that second pull. How good of a connection do they get in that second pull? How fast can they relax muscles to let the knees come forward appropriately in loading and unloading elastic energy? And I mean, that's what makes an Olympic lift, is the unloading and unloading of elastic energy in a good waveform. And so I've been thinking a lot. I was listening to like Jerome Simeon talking about how he coaches Romanian deadlifts and how he doesn't really like giving like these internal cues, or put your limb here, sit your butt back, do this. He'll just pinch the skin on the athlete's back and let them do a hinge, and they get to use sensory information to execute the lift better. And that is where it's at. There's the whole internal and external cue universe. Obviously, external is better than internal, but you could still mess up external cues. I'm not a huge fan of the push the ground away cue, because it can overpower the Achilles tendon and interfere with the timing of the Achilles unloading. And I'm just not a big fan of it. I'm not saying there's situations where it's not going to work or help an athlete improve their time, but I just think from a principle perspective and the timing of the Achilles and the kind of that pulsing action of running, I just don't really use it. And I feel like just because the cue is external, I don't believe it is the optimal. I think the best that we can get, really, in many senses, is we can provide an athlete a sensory experience, and they can work off of a feeling and let their body be instinctual. I'm not saying there's not a time for external cues, or maybe even sometimes with internal cues. I know in more like a rehab setting type thing, and just a really fundamental, even in extreme isos, I'll use internal cues on those types of things. And but anyways, I kind of digress a little bit. So with the Olympic lifting, I'm getting to a place where it's like, well, how do you teach that second pull? And I think I've kind of come up with a system I feel like works really well, and I've been using it for about 3 or 4 years with swimmers who probably would be very branded as not the most adept athletes on land, but the majority of my swimmers have a pretty good second pull. They get a good elastic transfer as they move over the floor past the knees, and then they can load and unload energy and connect it. And I started to realize this too, as I realized that the guys, this is before I really took a big interest in it, but I noticed that the guys who were getting a good second pull and could get that little ping and that little quick brush off the bar tended to be just better swimmers and better athletes than those who didn't. And so, I mean, correlation does not mean causation, but I took it upon myself at that point to say, hey, I really want to start teaching athletes to do this in an energy transfer based manner. And so really, and this was before I knew a lot of the things I knew now, but I really hit it from a sensory perspective. So we went through a lot of like slow tempo, 505, RDLs, isometric holds at various positions along the path that you would clean the bar. And then and then maybe even like some really slow transitions between those, just so people could feel where they needed to be at particular points in time. But once that was established, a lot of the work that we would do with trying to kind of get that second pull would be just for them to have the bar at various places along the mid thigh, and just working on that brush or the bump, trying to feel them get a bump of the bar into a lift. And the best way I can describe it is basically, you're in that hinge position, and it would be where the bar is coming up about the midpoint of your thighs, and you would have the practice straightening their legs, stretching the hamstrings, and then unloading that into the bar, and then practicing carrying that unloading. What does it feel like to unload your hamstrings? What does it feel like to connect with the bar? Not trying to overhit it, but just trying to connect with it as a sensory piece, an alarm. And then how do you connect that with an upward, the upward motion of the hips, knees, and ankles extending? So basically just trying to connect a bump to a jump. And so again, it's funny because it's like all this to a lift that isn't even your sport, right? But I love motor learning, and I love the ways that we teach athletes things. And I think I've seen it pay really good dividends in the way that athletes can transfer energy into the bar and just be more athletic. So it's like, if you're going to use the Olympic lifts, I really truly believe that they shouldn't just be used to get the bar from point A to point B with the most amount of weight. I actually think that can set you backwards in jumping and sprinting, and I know it did for myself. My sophomore year of college, I got my clean all the way up to 245 and I only jumped 6'8" and barely, and I was slow. I was not a fast athlete that year. I don't even want to say what my long jump was. It was terrible. Whereas in high school, my max clean was like 185, and I high jumped 6'8.5" with bad technique, way worse technique than my sophomore year. I long jumped like 1.5 feet farther, could dunk way better, was generally just a much better athlete, and my clean wasn't as good. And the fact of the matter is I improved my max, but the waveform of that clean, the way I improved it, was garbage. And I mean, obviously, we could take a really simple and qualitative or quantitative approach, and we can look at Brian Mann's work with the velocity and how far do we let the bar from the body. I do think that does fit with the energy transfer. Athlete who has good harmonics on the bar, gets a good second pull, is going to have it pretty close to the body, and it's going to move at higher speeds. So the question then is, well, how do you really optimize it? How do you coach the lift that you get to that point? So I think by using the sensory of feeling the bar and feeling how you can carry that into a jump can make a big difference for athletes. So that's something that I think I've been thinking about a lot. And so what the last thing too is, I think people talk about like some people. I think any tool is only as good as you can move. I am not against any lift. I'm not against like. I just think there's always context for each lift, and it's how you do each lift. I don't think deep squats are terrible. I think it's how you do them, and it's also when you do them and how much you do them and how much you push the envelope. I don't think hang cleans are bad. I don't think full cleans are bad. I think it's the harmonics. It's if you're going to do a full clean, how fast can you get under the bar after that impact, that second pull? How fast can you reverse that? And can you get a really clean waveform impulse? Can you get an impulse that reflects what happens in acceleration sprinting? That's why I think an Olympic lifter that does a lift in a particular manner does have really awesome acceleration. There's probably a lot of things that show up. I talk about this in my book, Speed Strength, too. You can see this, and sometimes you'll see the Olympic lifter, the sprinter, who has amazing acceleration, and then they're doing cleans, and they're almost looking to stop that pull short, that pull in the clean. It looks like it stops short, and then they quickly squat under it and catch it. But then you watch them accelerate, and it's the exact same thing. And again, I don't believe in full triple extension or teaching it for sprinters. I do think some sprinters do it, like Ben Johnson, as Darian Bars taught me, was tight jointed. It was just easy and natural for him to get to triple extension. But for a lot, and then he was so tight jointed and fast, he could recycle that triple extension and keep that energy without losing it. If you coach someone to triple extend, it's wasted energy because they lose the energy out the back of that straight leg, and they can't get that leg back in front fast enough. So when you see someone who almost cuts that Olympic lift pull just a little bit short and gets under it fast, they're just recycling energy fast. It shows up in their sprinting. It's all how you do it. There's no lift that's awesome or bad. Like, it's all in context. I mean, I don't, so I'm not going to really sit here and say, oh, never do this lift, never do that lift. It's all what you're doing with it. I do think there's lifts that are better than others, and there's also lifts that are simpler than others. And I will always cater towards a simpler lift. I always cater towards a hex bar deadlift over a barbell deadlift with the bar in front of you. I just think one is simpler and more straightforward for the athlete and makes more sense. But again, it's all about the waveforms. I also think that too, and this was something I've been thinking about since the Tony Holler episode, and the dopamine and everything that comes with that, is just the way that you promote or have athletes experience personal bests in the weight room. One thing I've been doing recently is looking at the Kaiser jumper, which is an awesome way to assess power. And I've used it a lot. I use it a lot with swimmers. I've used it in the past with track athletes quite a bit, and I've always feel like there's some good value in it. But one thing that you tend to see, and that I always try to avoid this. I always try to create my training in a way that an athlete, every time they do that jumper, is going to see a higher output than the week before, either through letting them put a little bit more weight on it, or just making sure that it fits with the training progression, that I know they'll be in a better place, hopefully. And if I know they won't be in a better place, then we don't go for numbers. We'll cover up or if it's a few weeks before the conference meet, maybe we'll just cover up the numbers, because I don't want them to see it, because if they see something that's lower than they like, then it's going to get in their head, so we just cover them up. But I've also had this idea of modifying the way you do like a Kaiser jumper, like doing 3 little twitch reps at the bottom and then exploding up. And then saying, okay, you set a PR in that's awesome, like good job, like, and then saying, well, this probably transfers more to athletic qualities than just a straight up Kaiser jump, and just because it's more impulse driven. And even a swim start, for the sake of swimmers, even swim starts and off the walls, it does come down to that initial impulse of that critical joint angle where the whole movement starts, even though the movement does extend in this exaggerated manner that fits with the water. But that was something I've kind of thought of that I think is pretty cool, in the way that we just frame ordinary lifts and we frame personal best. And I think our goal really, as Tony Holler was talking about in his bigger, faster, stronger PR system, meets Feed the Cats, is how do we find ways, no matter what our environment, to constantly feed our athletes personal bests and ways they can always see improvement in whatever they're doing. So we really limit the chances where they're second guessing themselves and comparing themselves to where they were a few weeks ago. And, granted, there's always, it's always important to look at, like, if your lifestyle is bad, you're not sleeping, you're stressed out, there's something you need to fix with your nutrition. Obviously, you probably don't want athletes to totally live in like a fake thought that they don't need to fix any of that stuff. But all that being said, you need to just find ways to creatively keep athletes on that PR train. I think. I mean, there's always different ways to put it too. I mean, you look at how successful the Bondarchuk system is, right, and how awesome that system has been for so many athletes. And clearly, those athletes are bought into the process too. But you're going to see yourself rise and then fall. But to me, it's always like just the power of the system and the buy-in, the fact that athletes can see their performance drop off even right away. Someone whose reaction goes like that and then come back up and exceed it is a really special and cool thing to me. But I think that also comes with the athlete and coach, that they know what's coming, they know what to expect because of the groundwork laid by great coaches and seeing how this system lays out. So, I mean, as long as the buy-in's there and you can mitigate if there isn't a PR, and you can mitigate that and you can show how it's part of the system that you didn't PR and why and how we're going to go and where we're going to go, then that's awesome. But if you don't work on that Bondarchuk system, I do think that, again, just kind of constantly be thinking about ways to give athletes PRs in different movements is very important. So that, all that being said, the last thing I want to kind of leave you guys with, and not a super long episode today, but just long enough to kind of get some thoughts and ideas that have been kind of floating around in the dome, things I've been implementing and training again. I think a lot of people ask me kind of where I've gone with a lot of the information and these ideas throughout the guests and just my own reading and experience. But it's how do you structure the workout in a way that gives an athlete their best workout, their best experience? How do we stimulate the brain chemistry in a way that's going to give them the optimal system and experience? And so I'll share probably what I've been doing with like my tennis team, and that's we tend to, and just like James Smith had talked about, starting out with the perception reaction work. Tennis is not an invasion sport, so human to human reaction is not quite as high of a priority, but we still will start out by doing partner reaction based work, where you have to react to the partner based off a hip turn or a shuffle or something like that. A lot of mirror drills. We do a lot of the Marvin Marinovich ball work with reverses and quarter reps and half reps and full reps and things where they have to stay on their toes. Recently, we've been integrating a really just fast reaction test where a partner will hold the ball and the other partner has to either tap the ball at their feet as fast as they can, or their hands to the ground, or both, or one leg at a time. And that's just an awesome drill for lighting up the nervous system. There's a smile on everyone's face when they do it. It gives everyone a chance to kind of get involved, be a coach, so to speak, to push their partner. And it's fun. And you're lighting that athlete up for the next workout or part of the workout. Usually then we'll get to a little bit more of the meat and potatoes, the lifting-based work of it all. And I always finish with ISOs or super slow, extreme ISOs or super slow type work. And in my tennis population particularly, we've seriously seen a reduction in injuries by really swapping out a lot of the traditional lifting and putting in a lot of isometric and super slow type work. And in a lot of those sports where body weight is not a factor, where you do not need mass and armor, I think that coaches, we have a lot left on the table by really not exploring the benefits of the isometric and super slow type work. And if you've noticed my trend of all the Jay Schrader disciples and mentees I've had throughout this podcast, you realize how big of a deal it is and how much it's helped them. And I think it can help you guys a lot as well. So, well, that does it for this solo show, and it was good just to sit down and kind of share some thoughts with you guys. I know not. It's always fun to have guests. I love talking to all the guests who have been on this show, but I always also enjoy just sitting down and reflecting. And so, if you have any thoughts or comments based off of mine, I'd certainly appreciate it if you logged on to Just Fly Sports, find the web page for this particular episode, drop me a comment, a line, tell me what you think, or how you're arranging your workouts in a way that gives athletes an awesome experience to just keep those PRs rolling and keep the nervous system in a great place. It really is the art of coaching. So with that, we'll sign out. We'll be back next week with another great guest. But please visit our sponsor, simplyfaster.com, suppliers of high-end training technology. If you like the show, please give us a rating or review. We would really appreciate you doing that. And we'll see you all next week.